Hi, everyone. This week I'm joined by my friend Solana.
Hi, I'm Solana.
Solana is a great talker. Whenever I run into her at parties, we always have great conversations. So I thought she'd be a good guest for this week's episode on Normcore.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a topic that's important to me because I've wanted to do a Silent Generation episode on all of the early internet aesthetics.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many of them. There's C-Punk, Vaporwave, Health Goth. There's kind of just two left. There's Normcore and then Witch House.
Right.
And I wanted to do Normcore a couple of weeks ago, but I started the process of putting together a Pinterest board for it, and I realized it never was really a thing.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of take a step backwards and think about what Normcore was and how to do this episode.
Yeah. After doing a lot of research about it and stuff, it's not so finite. So as I don't know, the other ones maybe.
Yeah, it kind of killed off what the idea of what an internet subculture was. Internet aesthetics, they kind of, initially they did have more in common with the subcultures that came before the internet. And then Normcore, for a variety of reasons that we're going to really detail at the end, it killed off that component of internet aesthetics. And this is sort of a capstone episode. We're going to go through broader categories of what internet aesthetics are, and then talk about what Normcore did to kind of change things.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce 4 categories to start out: consumer aesthetics, early internet subcultures, Vaporwave-inspired internet aesthetics, and then TikTok aesthetics. The first one is consumer aesthetics. We just did one last week on Utopian Scholastic. Previous Silent Generation episodes on McBling, Y2K Futurism, and Whimsicraft, those were all on aesthetics that were identified by the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute.
Right.
And these are aesthetics that sort of naturally arise in culture from advertisers and designers thinking about the changing world and what consumer trends are happening. And these would exist without the existence of internet aesthetics. But like Evan Collins and the people who initially first identified them, they were able to do so because they had the language of internet aesthetics first. Like Evan Collins was really interested in Vaporwave before he discovered Y2K Futurism.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting to think about consumer aesthetics being real and then the internet takes it on versus real, big on the internet and then it becomes bigger. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they do become bigger, like Y2K Futurism and the Y2K aesthetic. It never really materialized in fashion very much. It was more of an advertising thing, especially online.
Right.
But yeah, then people, when I was in college around 2016, they discovered Evan Collins' Facebook group, and then there started to be brands like Medical that would put out clothing like that.
Right, right.
And these kind of happen all the time at any moment. They're not bound to a particular time period. And they've continued throughout the digital era, and they're kind of always going to be a thing. But then early internet subcultures, those started to emerge around 2009 with Witch House. That was the very first one.
Right.
And these sort of developed up until 2014. I've already mentioned a few of them, C-Punk, Health Goth, Vaporwave being the big ones. But these all began on Tumblr. The way they kind of operated was people would find images they thought were inspiring, and then they started to ask questions like, what would music that looked like this aesthetic sound like? And what would a lifestyle based around these ideas be like? They took the characteristics of traditional subcultures and tried to apply them to images on Tumblr.
Right.
Were you around when Tumblr was a thing? Because you're actually our youngest Silent Generation guest.
Right. Hello.
Wait, do you want to tell people your birthday?
Oh, yeah. I was born on 9/11/2001. So, yeah. There was a big change that day. Yeah, no, I wasn't really partaking in Tumblr. The more I think about it, the more I'm I think I was just unaware, maybe. I don't know. I did have a lot of friends that were on Tumblr, and I would kind of get it maybe secondhand through them. I
was never on Tumblr myself even.
Yeah.
I was aware of it, and I would go on people's Tumblrs like Zombells.
Yes.
But I never made an account because things were moving so quickly during that time period. By the time I heard what Tumblr was, I was like, is it really worth making an account?
Yeah, right. I was overwhelmed at the thought of making a page. Maybe I don't like to commit to having a online persona that much. Yeah. But I did look at other people's Tumblrs often. And I would like go to my friend's house and we would scroll on Tumblr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, this is when internet aesthetics were kind of at their peak in a way. Very few people knew about them.
Right.
But I just think that the aesthetics that were identified and the way they were executed were just like so fun. And I'm really nostalgic for this period.
Yeah.
But then after 2014, internet aesthetics they reached their second iteration, which was like Vaporwave-inspired internet aesthetics. This was kind of when I think boys discovered internet aesthetics.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Like, I only knew of Vaporwave through a boy I wanted to impress. He was like, oh, let's like listen to these songs, and it's like blank Banshee songs. And I'm like, these are great. And then of course I feel like that moved to like Instagram graphic, like, or all kinds of graphics. But specifically, I think I saw them on Instagram, like that, very Vaporwave, like hazy, neon, bright colors and the little Roman statue things.
Yeah, because by 2014, Tumblr stopped really being used as a social media site.
Yeah.
And I think that internet aesthetics kind of entered a lull period from 2014 up until 2020. And it was partly because the platforms, the social media sites people were using weren't pretty well suited for like sharing images.
Right. Yeah. Tumblr went down and there wasn't anything to replace it.
Yeah. Like the people who were real interested in internet aesthetics during this time, they'd try to take off on SoundCloud.
Yeah. Oh my God. Right. Right. I think, and if you think about Vaporwave too, that's so musical. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right.
Oh, but what were the like sort of Vaporwave inspired ones? They were like synthwave, hard vapor, Mallsoft, Simpsons wave.
Yeah.
It would be these like faceless accounts making music and then posting it. It was like the least physical of any iteration of the three periods of internet aesthetics.
Totally. It was very, very internet, and very music heavy, like lo-fi beats to study to, like a lot, like it's a lot of like Japanese.
Yeah, it's really hard to like wrap your head around, because we did an episode on Vaporwave and I kind of consider it to be one of our worst ones.
Oh, really?
Just because it was really hard to distinguish like who was important or who were central figures. Because even people like, say, Home, who released Resonance, the most famous Vaporwave song of all time, he's just some guy who had like one hit that was important.
Right. Yeah. There wasn't like a leader of Vaporwave. Like, it is really vague, but it was really prevalent too, which is, I don't know, interesting.
Yeah. Oh, before we move on to the next section, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So why do you think it might be that internet aesthetics were in this lull period? You suggested that there might have been this like vibe shift moment around 2016 that contributed.
Yeah. The obvious one in 2016 is like Trump's election. I think also like there was something important happening in 2014, 2015. Also like the shift in the way the internet was maybe used and how it was used so widely. Like,
yeah, being Instagram being so important.
Yeah, Instagram was so important. And like by 2016, so many more people had an Instagram, and it was like you saw what your neighbor was posting. Like all of a sudden, like you see your neighbor's politics, and like that's something you maybe wouldn't have known otherwise. And like,
yeah, there was this period where people would have multiple social media accounts, and Instagram would be the cool version of yourself. Facebook was for your family.
Right.
Snapchat was for your illicit side.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. And Instagram was like, that's supposed to be like the face of you. It was still, I would say, like casual. You are posting like your Starbucks and like a like really grainy selfie with like a filter on it. But it was niche. I don't know, less curated to a specific part of you and more like, this is who you are.
Yeah, the internet allowed literally anything to be part of your identity.
Right. Yeah.
Like prior to the 2000s, if you had an obscure worldview or an obscure interest, you had to keep it to yourself more.
Yeah. And there kind of wasn't a way. It was unlikely that like grandma's going to find it, like she doesn't know what to search to find it. Whereas I feel like Instagram, it's like you can post it, and if they know your name, all of a sudden they know all of this about you too. Yeah. It was just so much more available.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective on that being a vibe shift.
Yeah.
Because Josepha and I have talked about recently how when you're coming of age in a particular time, you're able to see vibe shifts that happen much more than people of older generations. Like for Joseph and I, 2007 to 2008 is really clear. For boomers, 1968, 1969, like that's really important for their generation. And I know for sure people younger than me, they must have other flashpoints. To me, it's always been a bit too obvious that Trump changed things.
Right.
I've always wanted there to be a more complex explanation. But yeah, I don't think people typically tie Trump's presidency to being the reason why internet aesthetics were kind of lame for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But I think Normcore has a big factor in that too, which we'll get to in a couple of moments. But yeah, so there's 4 categories of aesthetics. 3 of them are sort of internet aesthetic categories. We've gone through 2. The last one is TikTok aesthetics, and this is beginning in 2020. And this is actually when aesthetics reached their peak popularity. Google Trends says that like the peak search volume for aesthetics happened during lockdown when everyone was at home with too much time to spend online. And it makes sense why like more people started to be aware of it. And I think of this as being as when girls became more aware of internet aesthetics.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Do you spend a lot of time on TikTok? Do you have an account?
I have an account, yeah. Never posted on it, ever. I used to like watch it pretty frequently. I notice I don't have much self-control when it comes to like, I could really just like lay in bed and do nothing. So I deleted it off my phone. And I don't know, I download it sometimes to like catch up.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I have a TikTok account. I also don't post. I do get some aesthetic content, like whether it be scenecore or McBling.
Yeah.
I also get a lot of Tuscan Kitchen compilations. Those are good.
Right.
But I feel like the thing that made TikTok a good platform for internet aesthetics was that the still images could be prepackaged with music.
Right.
That made it a really effective combo.
Yeah.
Like Instagram, you can add music to posts now, but you couldn't do that until a couple of years ago.
Right.
And it wasn't a good platform for aesthetics because of it.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe it's just me, but it feels almost like cornier to add music to an Instagram post, whereas like TikTok, it's like, that's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels lame.
Yeah, it does feel
I do that
lame.
with some of the silent generation posts that we do because it does help them kind of get more traction, but I don't like doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It always feels like no matter what the song is, it's like, oh.
It's never quite the right fit.
No. Yeah.
But yeah, TikTok aesthetics are somewhat foreign to me. We, like Joseph and I, we've done episodes on the 3 prior categories. This one we haven't. We probably will one day just to sort of like see how they operate and what makes them special. But I do think that Normcore, it has a bit more in common with TikTok aesthetics than what, the traditional internet subcultures or the Vaporwave-inspired ones, in part because a lot of them were based more on vibes or ideas, like say coastal grandma.
Right.
You can't be a coastal grandma.
No.
That is just sort of this, it's like a mode of being, you know?
Yeah. And that's arguable for quite a few. Like cottagecore, it's like, you're not really at a cottage. Like, you're not really in,
Because prior
making your own
subcultures,
butter.
they would actually have pretty substantial lifestyle changes where you would change the way that you ate, the way that you got around, say a motorcycle, a skateboard.
Right.
You would like change your family and that kind of thing.
Right. Chosen family. Yeah. I definitely think there's something much more lonely about a TikTok aesthetic because it feels so much more like you're like holed up in your room. Like you don't actually know these people in person.
Yeah. Yeah, because the real life subculture element, it is actually really nice.
Yeah.
Joseph and I are kind of tangentially in a subculture of sorts. And having people that you just naturally vibe with and having a big community of people that you can invite out to things instead of 1 or 2, it makes life better than just trying to meet this aesthetic standard that only a handful of people you don't personally know care about.
Right. It's kind of nice to have like a big community of people that all have similar interests, but also just enough to like not be the same person. Like it'd be really frustrating to have 3 friends and it's like you're all the same person. It's like you guys are competing. I don't know. And that'd be frustrating.
Yeah, those questions about the degree of difference between you and other people are kind of central to how Normcore came to be. We're going to get into the origins now.
Right.
So K-Hole was a trend forecasting group that existed in New York City from 2011 to 2016. And they came out with one report per year pretty much because they only came out with 5 reports. And their 4th one was the one that got them the most attention, which we'll get to in a moment, but it was Youth Mode, a report on freedom. But I love K-Hole. I see Silent Generation as being of a similar tradition, but we don't do trend forecasting. What we do is typically retrospectives when someone coined a term when they were in the right place at the right time, and they happen to create a phenomenon as a result.
Yeah.
And we're not the ones creating the terms, but we talk about people who have.
Yeah. I think it's like quite a bit of luck being able to coin a term at the time that it's happening. Like to have your finger so on the pulse, you can have your finger on the pulse as much as you want, but it still requires a certain amount of luck to coin a term properly. And
yeah, you have to be really tapped into everything that's happening. You have to be at the center of whatever's happening at New York City and care a lot about trends and read magazines every day. And it seems exhausting. I don't actually want to be like that.
No, I don't want to be like that. And I don't want to go through like the 95% of stuff that doesn't matter and won't ever even really make an impact. Like, I don't care what's happening in Brooklyn.
Yeah. I would much rather talk about things that have happened than speculate about things that might. But it is an important role. Like, definitely. And it is a career you can have if you work in fashion. Although the jobs for trend forecasting, like say at department stores, they used to hire trend forecasters. They're not doing it as much now because things just happen too quickly. But it used to be a job that you could actually have. Right.
I feel like it's kind of moot now because you can find a trend forecaster on TikTok just like in the search bar. So why hire it at a department store?
Yeah. K-Hole did actually get hired to do a private report, but I don't think that's ever been publicly released. But I believe it was on like men's apparel. But they might have done a 6th one at some point. But that's every cool person's dream is having companies pay you to give your advice on what's cool.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so what was in Youth Mode, a report on freedom? This is where the term Normcore comes from. But as you can guess from the title of it, that kind of wasn't the point. The title is Youth Mode. Youth Mode was another term that they coined. And there's sort of 3 that they articulate throughout the article. They're Youth Mode, Mass Indie, and Normcore. So it wasn't their intention for Normcore to become like the central idea that people got excited about. I think they were hedging their bets on Youth Mode more so.
Yeah. I mean, they put it in the title, so.
So how would you describe Youth Mode?
I guess it like removing the age from your perspective. Like Youth Mode, it's like age does give a little context, but it's more like not letting your age affect like your actions a little bit or your interests.
Yeah, I think of it as being basically that you have a degree of openness and a willingness to change that you can have at any age in your life.
Right.
Like someone at 23 who's Christian Girl Autumn who decides to settle down isn't in Youth Mode.
No.
But creatives in New York City who are 50 years old, who are going to after parties and connected to the right people, they can be Youth Mode. They're more youthful than people who have like settled down at a young age.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot because I personally know 2 people on the same side or different sides of that spectrum. Like a girl I went to high school with, it's kind of awesome the way that she is dressing exactly the same. She is dressing exactly the same as she did at 17.
Yeah.
And like same clothes, is doing her makeup with the exact same products, hair the same. Like it's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I like people who are like sentimental to a degree.
Yeah.
And they have certain parts of their wardrobe that they don't change. I feel like they're usually pretty warm.
Yeah, Oh, yeah, for sure. And she's just a very like generous person. Yeah. But then I also have this coworker I used to have, and she's 54 now. And she is like more tapped in than me most times. Like, and she's so funny because when you talk to her, she'll be like, I don't know. She's like, I was so risky in my early 40s. Like, and she always like tells some crazy story. Like, she really doesn't. Yeah, she is like totally.
She's in Youth Mode.
Yeah, she's in Youth Mode. Right. She's the total embodiment of Youth Mode.
Yeah. And I find the way that they start the report, thinking about Youth Mode, they kind of frame it in a very millennial way in a sense, because they talk about the degree of difference that someone can truly be an individual if they're ultimately going to fall within the confines of their age cohort. And that was just like a very millennial way of thinking at the time. Was they would very openly express like, differences between boomers and millennials. And this was sort of the peak of it around 2013 when this report came out.
Right.
So what were some of the other terms? So there was mass indie. That one, it sort of describes the normification of alt people. That's a good way to think about it. Right. Nymphet Alumni in one of their episodes once talked about the altification of normies, and that's been an important concept I've thought about forever.
Yeah.
But sort of the reverse trend happened around this time period where alternative people, say in the 90s, they had to try really hard to not look like a poser.
Right.
They had to listen to music and read books and watch movies that people hadn't heard of, and it was a mark of how interesting, exceptional, cool you were, the more obscure it was. But the internet changed that. You stopped having to present yourself in that way, and you could just say that you liked Carly Rae Jepsen or the new Kanye West album. That was fine during this time period.
Right. Do you think it was like the normification of alt people until it turned into the altification of norm? Do you think it was like was there like a timeline where it kind of swang the other way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this process in culture called schismogenesis. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's basically how groups will define themselves and their culture and react in opposition to others. So alternative people and normies are kind of always moving against each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes they line up. I think there was this period maybe in the 2020s when they were kind of almost on equal footing.
Yeah.
But I would have to really sit down and think about it to answer that question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I definitely think it's a wave.
Sine waves.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they meet in the middle.
Yeah.
But I really did horrible in pre-calc. I don't remember any of that. But when I actually read Youth Mode, a report on freedom in high school, I misinterpreted what mass indie meant at the time. Because there's this quote in there where they talk about whether you're soft grunge, pastel goth, or pale, you can shop at Forever 21. And I saw that and I thought mass indie described internet subcultures, because at the time there wasn't a word for them. There had been just a handful, like 3 or 4, and people were aware that there was a phenomenon happening on Tumblr, but we didn't have the language for this. Again, it was like aesthetic wasn't even used yet.
Right.
Yeah. So I heard that and I was really excited about it. And I thought back in the day that what this report was trying to do was it was trying to predict or encourage a umbrella term, Normcore, for a cluster of subcultures based around normie fashion and aesthetics. That never happened because that actually wasn't what they were talking about. That was a misinterpretation on my end when I was younger.
Yeah, I could see that. And even just the term mass indie, you could, I don't know, take it individual. Yeah, totally. I could see that.
But all of these terms we're talking about, there's so much interpretation you can have about them. Because this is art speak, it's theory, it's theoretical.
Right.
This is not a guide on how to dress normcore, like the article we're going to talk about right after this. This was sort of a manifesto of sorts about the degree to which you should be different. And it was a guide to, ask yourself questions like, how much joy can I get by trying to blend in or trying to stand out? Where's the happy middle?
Yeah. Because at some point it's you can't be an alt girl at Pilates. If you want to be at Pilates, you just have to put on the yoga pants.
Yeah, I think alternative fashion is perfect for young people because all you have to do is show up to class and sit there and stare at your teacher.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you're not clocking into a job. And if you are, it's at the coffee shop.
Yeah. And if you go to PE, you have a separate uniform to change into.
Right. Totally.
Okay. But Normcore.
Yeah.
This doesn't appear in the report until page 27, but the way it's introduced is one of my favorite quotes of all time. I actually bring this up to people, when I'm giving them very serious life advice because I think it's actually pretty profound. But they say, once upon a time, people were born into communities and had to find their individuality. Today, people are born individuals and have to find communities. That's just so eloquent and beautiful because I do think that people often are searching for connection. And I've thought about this a lot over the course of my life. And I think the answer is often either to find a subculture or to lean into individuality.
Right.
But you have to recognize that we do live, if you're westernized, if you're not part of a traditional culture, you have to sort of embrace individuality in order to be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Humans are constantly teetering the individual community, you know? Yeah.
Especially in the West, though. Did you ever take a class in college on anthropology?
I took all my anthropology classes specifically centered around women and children.
I took a children's anthropology class too.
Yeah.
But I took like at least 4 classes on anthropology in college. And one of the things that my professors would really drill into me and to the rest of the class is that it's impossible to not have culture.
Right.
Like there's this idea in the West that to have culture is like an upper class or aristocratic thing to be cultured, and that you cannot have it. And they always try to dispel that rumor, and they have reasons too, because it's rooted in colonialism and racism. And but I do think that in the modern world, as a person online, as we are less interconnected, it is true that there are people who like don't have a system of values because they don't interact with other people. Like there are people like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. They just don't have exposure to other people at all that they care about. Like, I don't know. So how are you to care about anything? Yeah. So
what was Normcore ultimately meant to be? It was supposed to be sort of the embrace of connection. And it was supposed to be this thing that you were constantly thinking about, because what it means to be normal in a given place at a given time, it's always changing. And you have to be adaptable in order to remain Normcore. So it was never meant to be this like one aesthetic. And actually, the people who were behind K-Hole before it dissolved, in a later article that came up more recently, they talked about how it was sort of an anti-aesthetic. This was telling people not to try to be as different as possible and be C-punk or health goth or vaporwave, and instead they should try to blend in order to have a better life.
Yeah, you can blend in anywhere, and you can like make connections in different ways, than you could before.
Yeah. So this term, Normcore, it was coined in K-Hole's report in 2013, but it didn't reach like mainstream popularity until 2014, until there was an article in The Cut by Fiona Duncan. It was titled Normcore, Fashion for Those Who Realize They're 1 in 7 billion. And I think this article popularized it for 2 reasons. One is because it was more of an editorial. There are about 20 images of people wearing quote unquote Normcore clothing. But then also, I just think the title, Fashion for Those Who Realize They're 1 in 7 billion, is kind of bleak.
Yeah, it is bleak, and it like kind of really makes you think about yourself. It's like, oh, I'm 1 of 7 billion. So like, I want to know about this.
Yeah, it's a bit nihilistic.
Right.
And I feel like there is something a bit nihilistic of being like, okay, I can't be different. Why not just dress like my mom and dad?
Yeah, it is. It's totally nihilistic. It's kind of giving up a little bit. Like,
giving up your youth.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
So the editorial images included in the article, the people in them, they're wearing things like, Nike, Adidas, beanies, denim jeans, baseball caps, scarves. They're just slightly elevated basic outfits. And they do make me think about what people were wearing when I was in high school. Yeah. And it is emblematic of the time. And I feel like it probably was like a very easy photo shoot to put together, because I imagine Fiona Duncan just getting friends together and telling them to wear clothing they already had. I don't imagine this was actually styled.
No, definitely not. Like, it was like, grab your basics, guys.
Yeah. And so this was what really popularized it at the time. But I think the term really took off for a couple of reasons. But one of them was that you could turn to your friend, regardless of what they're wearing, unless they were actually like very alternative and mass indie. Yeah. You could just say like you're Normcore, and they had no idea what it was, but it described, the majority of people you already knew. Yeah. So you could just call people that, and then they would learn about it organically in real life. It was media attention, but it was also that.
Right. And it's pretty easy to just like be Normcore, or at least like this concept of Normcore. Like, you literally just have to wear like a white shirt and like jeans, and it's like, oh, you're so Normcore. It's like, it's easy. So yeah.
It did get co-opted by the fashion world, though. And this is one of the things that I think made it kind of kill off the subculture component of internet aesthetics. Because I remember seeing this like ad when I was in high school, or maybe it was early college, but it was just like a model wearing jeans, and then underneath it said #Normcore. And I can't remember where it came from, but other brands, they did have similar campaigns. Like Gap came out with their Dress Normal campaign around this time, which I'll link an article in the show notes that talks a bit about that. And the author of that article directly links it to Normcore. But I think it was kind of like a convenient way for fashion companies to start to sell fast fashion clothing that wasn't as nice than what was produced in the 90s or 80s,
Right.
and sell it, and people thought it was cool because it was a trend.
Yeah, it didn't have to maintain like pretty much any level of quality. You don't have to be creative to come up with it either. Yeah.
Yeah. There is Normcore, the trend, and then Normcore, the maybe partially attempted aesthetic that kind of did happen. And if you were living at the time, you heard what Normcore was, you tried to dress like it. There was a way to dress like Normcore that was more elevated and intentional. And that did involve at times usually having like one or two higher quality or even designer pieces thrown into your otherwise Gap or Adidas or Nike wardrobe.
Right.
But those were the odd ones out. That wasn't very common.
No, right. Because Normcore was so used, and like especially as a joke, if you hear it, you just think like normal. And so everything became Normcore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the day, all aesthetics got called jokes. I still think they kind of are. Everyone would be like, that's not real. That's a joke.
Yeah.
But one thing that shows that it was that the New York Times, they actually came out with an article, after Fiona Duncan's, called Normcore Fashion Movement or Massive In-Joke, which shows how people were thinking about it.
Right.
That article is mostly a lot of name dropping, which is common for think pieces where people are talking about these cultural trends. They talk about Gap and Nike, but they also bring up this quote that I think has some truth to it. They say that Normcore was about dropping the pretense and learning to throw themselves into, without detachment, whatever subcultures or activities they stumbled into, even if they were mainstream. Again, that was a trend at the time. It was pretty novel for alternative people to be able to engage with mainstream things and not be excluded or called a poser from whatever subculture they're part of because of it.
Right. So for Normcore fashion, like what are the elements of Normcore fashion?
I think of them as being like simple tops, denim jeans, beanies, athleisure, running shoes, and elevated accessories.
Yeah.
Like t-shirts and turtlenecks. You might wear Nike and Adidas. New Balance shoes were kind of a staple.
I New Balance shoes were really like New Balance shoes with some cuffed jeans. That was
if
big.
Normcore was ever a thing, it was this.
Yeah.
But I think there's an important distinction to make between Normcore, the concept, and the execution.
Yes.
Because the concept, a lot of people would just say it's Seinfeld, like dress like Seinfeld.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes me think of the Vaporwave-inspired period of internet aesthetics, because one of the big ones was Simpson Wave.
Right.
And I think that sort of mentality, which was common in this period, like 2015 to 2020, it's a misinterpretation of what internet aesthetics ought to be.
Yeah.
Because instead of it being about, pursuing this platonic ideal of what this aesthetic is and it leading you to obscure pieces of media, it is the normie way of being like, okay, this is the most common thing that exhibits the aesthetic. Let's talk about that.
Right.
It's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, you want an aesthetic to be new, not bring you back to something that's like actually so mass. Like The Simpsons is like, that's like one of the biggest like recognizable things you could possibly.
Yeah, The Simpsons and Seinfeld, they just look quotidian or everyday.
Yeah, right.
They're not aesthetically striking.
No, especially Seinfeld. I mean, people use it as Normcore for that reason.
Yeah.
But it really is like they do have that like blend in a crowd type clothing. Yeah, it isn't striking at all.
Did you watch Seinfeld at all growing up?
Here and there. I think growing up, the sitcom I watched was that 70s show more.
I didn't like shows that weren't cartoons as a kid. I was very much like that. Like I didn't want to watch Mary Poppins even because it was real life.
Yeah.
And so my parents would watch Seinfeld, and my mom actually really did dress like that. Like she wore medium wash or light wash mom jeans and t-shirts every day. But she was she would dress in this like kind of gender neutral way.
Yeah.
Anyways, like she had a man's wedding ring, but she fit into this aesthetic really well.
Yeah.
And there definitely were like moms and dads that did dress in this 90s normcore way. I think part of the reason why this is in some ways, it's an okay concept is because, the Normcore fashion, for those who realize their 1 in 7 billion article, they bring up how Normcore has clear aesthetic precedent in the 90s. Like the 80s were still a bit more formal. People would wear suits.
Yeah.
And Ronald Reagan and that whole idea of,
right.
They kind of idolized the old in a way.
Yeah. And also prep was really big in the 80s too. And
yeah, people would dress more formal. And then
Definitely.
By the time it was the 90s, people would just wear a t-shirt and baggy pants.
Right. 90s was very
slouchy.
Casual. Very slouchy, yeah. And specifically, I mean, this is definitely more geared towards women, but that kind of waif look and your clothes falling off. There was not so much structure and so much tailor as there was maybe in the 80s. Yeah.
I do like that look. I think it's okay. Too. I think every element of the mom dad or the 90s mom or 90s dad look is fine, except for maybe the horrible white shoes that get too dirty. I hate those.
That's so funny. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Then they're big, chunky.
Yeah.
Do you think it's when you describe your parents maybe dressing that way, do you think they dress that way with intention or because it's what they had and they didn't want to, I don't know.
For my mom, it was very utilitarian because she was a mom of 6.
Okay.
So she really just she did not want to devote any time to her appearance because of that. But I don't think they were very conscientious. It was sort of just, this is what you wore.
Right.
This is what's convenient and comfortable.
Right. And this is what I've had. And yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I do think we're probably going to use a picture from Seinfeld for this week's episode, although the Seinfeld characters will be partially obscured. I'm going to crop out the upper half of their face. But I like that image because, in part, I can't find any images that match the Platonic ideal of Normcore. Because, it kind of never happened.
Right.
And I don't want to use any images from Fiona Duncan's article. They're good, but they kind of also don't work in a way. I think the actual execution of Normcore, it was best embodied at the time by American Apparel. Because even before Normcore was a thing, they would market themselves as selling fashionable basics. They were thought of as being basic.
Yeah.
And the aesthetic of American Apparel, it shifted over time from what it initially offered to then toward its later half before it shut down, which was close to when Normcore happened, because I think American Apparel shut down in 2016 or 2017, and they released their denim line for the first time in 2011. But when American Apparel first came out, their aesthetic was sort of inspired by the 1976 Montreal Olympics. They sold things like leg warmers and tube socks, and it was all clothing that you could kind of work out in. And then by the company's later half, it became more preppy.
Yeah.
They did offer dress shoes. You could wear baby doll dresses. They started to offer prints.
Yeah.
But they had these clothing items that would really work well for the Normcore aesthetic. That was where you went to get a turtleneck if you wanted one.
Right.
That was where you would get medium wash jeans that were slightly baggier. Because at the time, dark wash jeans were kind of what everyone wore at that time period.
Totally. Yeah, I remember in that time period when I got my first pair of light wash jeans. Not so classy. They were from Hollister. But I remember thinking oh, this is different. This or feeling it was kind of a risk, wearing light wash jeans to middle school.
Yeah, because you didn't want to look like your 90s mom.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And my dad loved 90s mom jeans joke.
Yeah. But it's funny how things like that change, because over the course of your life, not looking like your parents becomes less of a priority than not looking like your past self. So for me at this stage, I don't wear jeans, but if I did wear them, they would be medium wash because I wore exclusively dark wash jeans in middle school.
Right.
So what you want to look like and what you consider normal does change, which is which is the central thesis of Normcore.
Right. I know that was a critique earlier on, for people's interpretation of Normcore is that they remove the context of what normal is as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think Normcore ever quite happened. It was actually kind of a joke. It never was an internet aesthetic or subculture. But I do think it did materialize later. And I think it materialized as the workwear trend that's particularly prevalent in NYC.
Yeah.
It's this sort of look where someone wears Carhartt or Dickies and then Adidas or Nike. But then they'll have a couple of items that signal to you that they know what they're doing and it is intentional. They'll wear an $11,000 watch, or they'll have a purse that's from fashion designer. And that's how they signal to you that they're not actually working class, that they are a creative.
I feel like I see that like Dickies and Carhartt, I saw that a lot growing up too in Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like skater core, but when you really look at it, it is kind of just normcore as well. Yeah. I feel like it's a kind of a blend of normcore and workwear.
But I do think it's interesting that normcore did essentially materialize later, because I think it gets at why normcore is a phenomenon. It kind of messed up internet subcultures because it happened too early. The internet aesthetics that happened before this, it took people a while to realize what they were. Like, I remember seeing very early health goth on Unicorn Kids Tumblr and knowing that this was a distinct aesthetic, but it took months or maybe even a year before someone had coined health goth and I learned what it was.
Oh.
So things would actually happen. And this was like, people got excited about the term before it was ever actually a thing.
Yeah, normcore didn't happen yet, but the term came about, and that's why, definitely why it kind
of messed things
black
up.
holed itself.
And then did you want to talk about that article, Normcore was always a misunderstood fantasy?
Yeah. Sense published an article in 2024 interviewing some of the collaborators for K-Hole.
Yeah, 3 of them.
3 of them, yeah. And I guess some of the quotes stood out to me. Normcore's appeal is how it offers a way of bulletproofing oneself from the trend cycles.
It was sort of opting out of fashion.
Right, definitely. And like kind of just being this like forever neutral.
That appeals to me because I don't like fashion very much.
Yeah, I think as I get older, I try to lean more towards that way, but I do have like still like a subconscious that's like, ooh, that's cute and I need that. But ideally, I would like to move away from that and, buy organic fibers and maintain them and whatever. And this is a quote that I just thought was so funny from there. Frankly, I didn't fully grasp what Gregory Fong meant in relation to normcore.
Yeah.
But he said this on normcore's influence. The millennials have no idea what's going on with Gen Z kids who are all dressed up like Kingdom Hearts characters. And the Gen Z kids think the millennials look like NPCs. They actually use that word. I think Gen Z, at the very least, embraces clothes a little bit more as a costume. And that's what we meant when we defined normcore.
Yeah. I do kind of get what he's saying, though, because what he is referring to is the idea of the look of you can put on an outfit and temporarily look a certain way instead of be a certain way.
Right.
It's not a lifestyle. Like, someone might hear about, say, Whimsy Gothic and pull together outfits that look like that for 2 weeks in order to like rise in the ranks of the TikTok algorithm.
Yeah.
It's not a dedicated lifestyle.
Right. The Gen Z kids that I think they're discussing that look like Kingdom Hearts characters, like those are the kids that all they have to do is go to college and sit down in a class. Like they can have...
At most, they could also just be neats online all day.
Right. Yeah. I just thought it was funny, especially when I see like keys. Like there's so much like jangling and like chains and like literally keys on the waist.
I do like how the article brings up the idea of the anti-aesthetic.
Yeah.
Because it was never intended to be co-opted by the fashion world and become this thing that could be used for marketing or a subculture. It really was supposed to be this like philosophy towards life where you remain adaptable.
Right.
And then did you want to talk about Gorpcore a little bit too? Because I do see how there's a relation between both Normcore and Gorpcore.
Yeah, I think Normcore is meant to be functional, but Gorpcore is like hyper functional, if not overly functional. Yeah, and being from like the Seattle area, I'd see a lot of Gorpcore and a lot of utility dressing. It's like a lot of running sneakers, and they're not New Balances. But like Normcore is like jeans and New Balances, whereas this Gorpcore is kind of like, at least for that tech bro, running shoes and then baggy jeans that like kind of hang over the running shoes in a really unappealing way sometimes. Gorpcore is definitely the more refined version of that, but
yeah. Because the Pacific Northwest is also where health goth came out of. And I think that a lot of factors there led to both of them arising, because they are kind of similar if you think about their aesthetic components. But, the abundance of rain, how many tech bros there are.
Right.
And then the indifference to older traditions that are still practiced in cities that are older in the country, like say New York City and Chicago, like wearing a suit to the office. That just doesn't mean as much there because they've grown more recently. So those three factors, I think, are why both Normcore and healthcare sort of emerged from that region.
That's a great point. I think because I'm from there, I never thought about it that much. But it is true. It's like in Seattle, you don't really see people dressing formally, if at all, unless you're like...
At a wedding.
Yeah, right. Genuinely at a wedding.
That's about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Joseph and I are going to do an episode on Normcore in the future. It was supposed to be in June, but it has to be moved back until I'm back from Europe. But I'll save a lot of my thoughts on it for then.
Yeah.
I also don't think we even really articulated what it was that well. But yeah, you'll hear about it in the future.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
And so to then kind of conclude, why did Normcore kill the subculture component of internet aesthetics? I think there's kind of three reasons, and I'll go through these one by one. But the first one is that aesthetics could be vibes or metaphysical concepts. And this is something you see now with TikTok aesthetics like cores or and the coastal grandma again, where it's like the idea that you could act like a grandma when you're not one, or
right. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the more like out there ones you can think of?
I know. I'm trying to think.
Because I hear about things that have core on the end all the time, and I'm like, have no idea what that is, but I can tell it's like just made up.
Yeah, right. I think that's probably why I can't think of a lot of them, because it's like, what is that? But yeah, core. And then there's a lot of like hope core.
Yeah, that's a metaphysical concept. That's
totally.
Not an aesthetic.
No, like, what does that look like? It's just a video of like a little kid like getting a signature from like a basketball player or something.
Because subcultures, there usually is a utopian or dystopian bent to them.
Right.
And then there's usually another subculture or a sub-aesthetic within the aesthetic that is the opposite of that. It's not usually, like, yes, there's manifestos, but they're not appealing to these metaphysical concepts. It's less abstract than that.
Yeah.
And then the second element is I think that after a certain point, all new aesthetics started to be called core. This was the first core. And that represents a moment in time where internet aesthetics became more formulaic. It was more interesting when they were arising organically and people had no idea what was going on. And they were just a genuine product of the internet at the time.
Right.
But then once people realized that they could be capitalized off of, that they could be this thing that gets repeated infinitely, people would just coin them without any backing.
Yeah.
And you still see this to this day on the aesthetics wiki. They try to remove pages that don't have a lot of content, but stuff gets put up there before it's ever a thing. And that it's a problem because Joseph and I have talked about on previous episodes how once a movement gets a name, it starts to decline, whether it be Electroclash or whether it be just that act of them getting a name, it starts to kill off their momentum. So to do it before it even exists, it's a problem. You need to let them kind of arise organically before you send them a name.
Yeah. Sometimes I get really skeptical, or like I'm like, some company is creating this core in hopes that it gets traction and then they can profit off of it, especially through TikTok or something. I'm like, you could just like pay an influencer however much money and be like, have them drop this one word and drop this company in it. I don't know. I get super skeptical sometimes about like fashion trends through TikTok and through influencers. And yeah, it's just so inorganic now, it feels to me.
Yeah, the aesthetics wiki page, it has a section actually basically their suggested pages where it's guidelines, and it says that if they perceive an aesthetic is being sort of astroturfed by a company that wants to sell a product by creating a hashtag, then they try to sniff it out and stamp that out because they want it to be something that people are genuinely passionate about, not just an aesthetic that's meant to sell a product. And then the third reason I think Normcore kind of killed off the subculture component of internet aesthetics is that it attracted the attention of the fashion world and things became too fashion focused in the TikTok aesthetics era. Yeah. There was the music focused era again from like 2015 to 2020, where all the Vaporwave-inspired ones were on SoundCloud trying to make these albums that, yes, they cared about, but they were only speaking to each other.
Right.
It was very like insular. But then I think once aesthetics did become too fashion focused, it was the idea of the look again of, okay, I'll wear this for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. There was no lifestyle component because it was about the fashion.
Right. Yeah, there's not really many cases of like lifestyle look, music, like like a fully fleshed out subculture anymore. That definitely
Yeah, I can't
kinda
think of
died.
any of the more recent ones where I see people who are engaged with an aesthetic that then you see a group of them.
Yeah.
Because there are examples of that for both health goth, C-punk, even
Right.
vaporwave, you can hunt them down. But that's not something you're ever really going to see for cottagecore.
No.
I have kind of seen examples from McBling, though, where there's a couple of them who do that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that the other day because I was walking from the train station, and I saw this group of like 3 people, and they were all dressed so like explicitly McBling and like the pink zebra print and everything. And I was like, oh, they found each other. Like, if, I was like, and they're drinking, like a big soda or something. Like, I was like, oh, you're living your truth a little bit.
Like a big gulp from 7-Eleven.
Yeah, exactly.
That was very mid-2000s trashy.
Yeah. I was thinking about like TikTok aesthetics and especially like Coquette because I'm like a Lana Del Rey fan.
Yeah.
And so through Twitter and TikTok, just I don't know. They're really good at like reading your mind, algorithms are. So I would be fed a lot of like Coquette, specifically ED stuff. And I feel like maybe they're living their truth a little bit because they are literally in their bed actually rotting, but like dressed in pink and frills, and like they're posting like a really curated thing to an unreleased Lana Del Rey song or something. I feel like they're living their truth a little bit, but they are doing it alone. Like they're not going outside.
But there is a bit of precedent with that with pastel goth, which I usually exclude from the list of early internet subcultures. But that one, they would aestheticize and valorize like bruises.
Yes.
It wasn't like emo was doing cutting. They were really into bruises for some reason, but that's kind of a precedent in a way.
Yeah, totally. I think bruises because it's like malnourished. You get bruised easily.
Yeah, there was a pastel goth girl in my school who definitely was, I think she was maybe anorexic.
Yeah.
But to get back to that group of McBling girls that you saw, I think maybe why that is a genuine, on paper, it's looking like a subculture to you because you saw them in public, engaged in activities together. But that might be taking off in the way that it is because it was originally a consumer aesthetic identified by Kari and Evan Collins. And so that was not killed off by someone putting a name on it too quickly.
Yeah.
It's been a thing for like decades.
Yeah.
So that's part of why I think maybe that's operating differently.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think like there was definitely like a resurgence or like an admiration maybe for McBling and then translate because like these like girls were 19. Like, they don't like, I don't even think they like could have an older sister that was like maybe, like
an aunt.
Yeah, an aunt. Maybe they have an aunt. Yeah, they got an auntie.
With a Tuscan home.
Right. Yeah. But like they're listening to like Aisha Erotica maybe. And yeah.
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 Well, I'm glad to see them doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that Normcore, the harm it did wasn't irreparable.
No.
Things are going to change eventually. We've lived through 3 different eras of internet aesthetics, and there's always going to be consumer aesthetics regardless of what's going on.
Right.
But I do feel like Normcore, I wish it didn't happen. It caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, it was a big lull and a big like a kind of uncreative lull. Yeah.
But things will change eventually.
Yeah.
And things will be okay.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming on today.
Sure.
This was a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye.